What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. This is In Liberty and Health. I've been looking forward to making this show happen now for 2 years. And unfortunately, it's not quite under I don't want to say the best circumstances, but it's always good circumstances with these guys. So today we're going to be talking about Ukraine, some of the libertarian takes on Israel, Palestine, and some of the other goofiness going on out there in the world. Um, so make sure you guys hit the like, subscribe, share all that good stuff. Hit all the links below where you can find my guests, myself, some of the best supplements that I'm currently using. Tiger Fitness, I just placed an order today because I'm all out of my daily multivitamin and outright bars, and I think a pump pre-workout, some electrolytes as well. And I got this awesome Tiger Fitness hoodie. Drink LMNT.com/in liberty and health for the world's best electrolytes. And Fox and Sons coffee for my favorite coffee. Use code Kyle at checkout for a little bit of a discount. Let Steven know I sent you. Like I said, I've been looking forward to making this show happen again. I originally met all of these guys about 2 years ago, almost to the date, where if it were the 24th, it would be 2 years. So in 2 days, it would be 2 years since I had these guys on last. So if you want to watch that show, that's episode 60. I was just listening to it actually before you hopped on here, where we actually talked mostly about China and stuff like that. We'll probably touch on a little bit of that today. But they're playing more pressing matters. And of course, with all my guests, it's just absolutely fantastic conversation that we're going to have today, I'm sure. So yeah, let's rock and roll. What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovic. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass.
Okay?
Yeah. All right.
Uh-oh. Hold on. There we go. Good afternoon, guys. Pat, Connor, and Kyle, welcome back to the show. Pat inspired me to drink. Normally, I'd be drinking on my other show, but tonight I got 10 cup whiskey. What's everybody else got? I know Kyle's got water, but how's everybody doing? And what's going down?
Hey. Oh, doing well, man. I got extra coffee tonight, no alcohol.
Oh my God, it's so late.
I'm drinking. Should have planned ahead.
Proper 12.
Mm-hmm. Proper 12. Oh, that Proper 12 is good stuff.
Yeah, it is good, and Point Amber too.
Oh man,
Point, Wisconsin.
Double fisting.
Yeah, I know. Kyle, what are you drinking?
I got 10 cup.
No, the other Kyle.
I got some Kirkland Costco brand water, and I think I got some Grease Monkey in here, so that'll be enjoyable.
Nice. Well, like I said in the intro, it's been about 2 years since we all got together. I've had all you guys on individually, and then sometimes together with other people throughout the last 2 years. But I figured this would be kind of neat to lay this out and kind of go over the last 2 years, specifically since we last talked. And it was kind of funny because the last time we did this, it was, I want to say, 10 days after the war in Ukraine broke out, and I had that planned way in advance, and nobody knew that that was kind of all go down there. So
well, you might have. We certainly didn't.
No, I was way too dumb at the time. I've learned so much from you guys in these 2 years that now I'm much more privy to what's going on in the foreign policy world. Mainly that is thanks to you guys and Scott and obviously Dave DeCamp. So maybe we could start with Connor, and let's kind of cover what's happened since February 14th, 2022. And then obviously Kyle and Pat, you guys can kind of tag on what you guys feel necessary.
Well, I'll just hit some of the things that are most important to me. The general consensus is there's been, and I don't know how accurate many of these estimates can be, but there's been approximately more than 500,000 casualties on both sides. Both sides put together. I assume that that's largely Ukrainian military conscripts who have been killed or maimed so horrifically that they will never live normal lives again. And we have crossed so many red lines that, to use the phrase now, seems almost, old-fashioned, because, and this is one of the things I was worried about as we got further into this war, Certainly there was an opportunity for an early resolution and a peace deal was on the table. I mean, some of the worst people in the world, whether you're talking about the Turkish government or the Israeli government, in the case of former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, attempted to mediate separate peace deals between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and they should have succeeded. But in both cases, you had the Americans and the British, namely the Biden administration and Prime Minister Boris Johnson, intervening to prevent there from being a peace and going instead for a long war, a proxy war, as Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary from Raytheon, has explicitly stated, to weaken Russia. And then this was confirmed subsequently in separate reporting in the Washington Post, where U.S. officials were saying that there are members of the NATO establishment who would prefer to see Ukrainians continue fighting and dying rather than for there to be any kind of a peace settlement before the war ends too soon at too high a cost for Europe. Not really. There's never been any genuine concern for the well-being of the Ukrainian people, at least not those who are living in the vicinity of where the fighting is taking place, or any of these conscripts, these poor men who are being enslaved to fight and die in the meat grinder. And since then, Ukraine has gotten unprecedented support from the Biden administration, from the NATO alliance. And the economic war against Russia has failed. It's helped to diminish any remaining vestiges of credibility that the United States has on the world stage. Russia, ultimately, after taking a major hit in the beginning of the war from the sanctions, bounced back and found all kinds of trading partners who were willing to bypass American sanctions. And they found, new markets for their oil. And it's been the complete boomerang effect where you have, most of the rest of the world, certainly the global South, does not side with Ukraine and not with the American-led NATO faction in this war. And they see the Americans and the British as being just the worst kinds of hypocrites here. And we see instead country after country lining up to join BRICS and to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. NATO has expanded into Finland and Sweden. Well, not Sweden yet, but certainly Finland, which shares an 800-mile border with Russia. And there hasn't been much learned in the American foreign policy establishment. We carried out some of the largest NATO exercises in the Cold War era this year, and it's going to probably just get worse because that's what all of Biden's policy has been, essentially to run the largest exercises and war drills you can as close to your enemy as possible and do them as often as possible. And so that will continue. Ukraine is covered in large swaths of Ukraine are covered in cluster bombs. It's the most cluster bomblets, I should say, which will be killing women and children and innocent people for decades into the future. It's the most heavily mined country on the planet. And we've had at various points in the war, neo-Nazi militias breaking across the border into, for instance, the Belgorod region on the border with Ukraine, attacking and killing civilians with American-supplied weaponry. And we've also been underwriting major drone attacks deep inside Russia, including on military bases where nuclear-capable bombers are stored. And we've helped provide intelligence to carry out things like drone attacks on the Kremlin. It's just been shocking. Assassinations that have been carried out by intelligence agencies that were built up by the CIA in the wake of the American overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014. And so all of these things have been happening, and we have not there. There were so many different things, levels of support that were ultimately carried out with Ukraine that were thought unfathomable previously, because this may or may not cross a red line with Russia where they might directly intervene in the war. But we've gotten to the point now where we're about to, Kyle just wrote a piece about this for the Institute, where we're going to be likely providing Ukraine with the Army tactical missile systems, which the worst hawks in our government have been calling for this whole time. But those have a range of nearly 200 miles. We have been sending them, I guess, medium range 155 millimeter artillery shells with the cluster bomb variant, which we know from the Discord leaks, for instance, that Zelensky and the Ukraine and the worst hawks in his government are absolutely dead set on using those kinds of weapons to attack deep inside Russia. And that's really all they can do now is just kill civilians in the Donbass and in these Russian-held areas like Zaporizhia and Kherson, but particularly the Donbass and beyond the border inside Russia, because the counteroffensive, all that did was probably kill tens of thousands more Ukrainians. And all these American Western and other Western military leaders knew for sure that that counteroffensive was not going to work, that the Ukrainians were woefully unprepared. But they sent them in there anyway because it has nothing to do with reclaiming territory, just bleeding Russia. Hopefully we can kill more Russians. Hopefully we can get Russia to spend more money to bleed more men. That's the best we can hope for here. But in the meantime, we're still at the brink of nuclear war with Russia, even as obviously the genocide in Gaza has taken up more of the news cycle. So Ukraine, I think, to the benefit, at least politically, for the massive failure of what's happening in Ukraine. Actually, I guess there really is no upside for the Biden administration here anyway, but certainly the people responsible for what's been happening in Ukraine are probably glad to get it out of the news. But frankly, it still has us really on the brink of complete annihilation still.
Yeah, it's a little bit nerve-wracking to think about. So, Kyle, when it comes to like some of the stuff like the Nord Stream pipeline, and I remember hearing a lot about the name of this particular city escapes me, but I remember they were calling it the meat grinder early on because the average life expectancy was 4 hours.
Bakhmut.
Bakhmut, that was it. Bakhmut, and then Connor mentioned the offensive that I remember it was supposed to be like the spring offensive, and they kept pushing it back. It was the summer offensive, and then like that just seemed kind of peter out. Was there anything that Connor kind of missed there that you want to elaborate on?
Not too much, really. I mean, I think Connor gave a pretty good summary. Of course, I mean, it's a 2-year long war, and there's a lot of things that have been going on. I guess, just a couple things that I could think of just today that came out in the Washington Post. They talked with some top American defense officials who said they felt that this war was benefiting the Americans because they're able to war game and plan for Russian strategies. They've realized that the way the U.S. has really been focusing its aerial munitions over the past really two decades has been on these precision guided munitions using smaller warheads, smaller munitions to hit SLED targets. And this is largely because we've been waging wars in the Middle East where we're fighting insurgencies. And so, not only do we maybe, at times want to kill only one person in one complex or something like that, but the U.S. military has even tried to design weapons where they could kill, say, one passenger in a car or something absurd like that. Not that it's that accurate or works that well, but they do, believe in and try to design these kind of technologies. Well, it's apparently fairly easy for Russia to disable these kind of arms. And so now they really have to reorient and redirect the way they've conceptualized our precision guided munitions over the year, how they're going to deliver to their target and things like that, because the current system is not going to work. And so also the utility of small drones on the battlefield has been a really big development. They talk about now how essentially on the front lines people are using racing drones, like not commercial but professional racing drones, strapping munitions onto them, flying them around, and then detonating them. And just all kinds of electronic warfare going on. They could track the Wi-Fi signals that they're using to fly these drones back to the handlers, and that's how they're taking them out. And I mean, there's a lot of like stories to be written about this war. There's the stories of what life has been like in Ukraine as Zelensky has nationalized the media, outlawed his opposition, outlawed religions that he felt were not subservient enough to the Kiev narrative, right? Rounded up any dissenters to this war. Just today in the Associated Press, there's some poor Ukrainian who's living in Kiev, hiding out in his apartment, saying that he feels like everybody just wants to feed him into this meat grinder. And certainly the American Congress does, and the White House does, because, they need to keep this meat grinder churning for another 7 months or until, the November election at least. And that's I think going to be a big date in this war. So this is, I mean, really nasty. Again, there's so many different stories to be written. One of the very interesting ones will be how combat evolved during this war, the different kinds of unmanned technologies and maybe even autonomous technologies that are being deployed, certainly in Israel too. with them using the gospel, the AI generating target facilitating machine and things like that. But particularly in Ukraine, I think we're seeing a lot more than we usually do, just because, Ukraine is essentially a NATO army, and then you have the Russian army they're fighting against. And so there's a lot of money, a lot of advanced technologies being poured into this war. I'm also going to be very interested in, after this war, when they provide more details on how Ukraine has been able to successfully intercept so many Russian missiles. I very much suspect that they've gotten very good at guessing what targets that Russia is shooting at, and rather than actually trying to maybe shoot down the Russian missile, put like basically a roadblock in between the potential target and the missile, and that's how they're downing them. Some interesting things like that going on in this war, but really the horrors is the what's happening on the front lines. As Connor mentioned, the Ukrainian interior minister, I believe, estimated 500,000 Ukrainian casualties, so that's dead and injured, but that's a huge number. They're struggling to field an army at this point. They say they can't conduct any offensive operations. It's only defensive operations, and even then they're struggling to hold territory.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, to throw it over to Pat here, it's kind of been interesting to see over the last 2 years as well, kind of how the anti-war fervor has seemed to kind of disappear amongst the populist, right? Specifically since October 7th, but even like after a while, like Matt Gaetz is putting forth a lot of bills and speaking out very, very courageously against the Ukraine aid. But it really seems like a lot of these efforts, when it comes to stopping the Ukraine aid, have largely kind of simmered away. And like, I don't want to say that's without merit, because I mean, if you just sit there and constantly are I don't want to say grandstanding either, but like if you're standing against this aid and then generally every single time it gets passed anyways, like what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to continue fighting? I think so, but like I can't really blame people for saying like, well, fuck it, I'm just not going to try anymore because there's nothing left to do. So maybe get into a little bit more of a 10,000 foot view and people in our camp and the way that maybe we should look at things. Pat, what are some of your takeaways? And if you have anything else to add that Connor or Kyle didn't get into, feel free to add that.
First, to jump off of what you were just saying about, our friends on the populist right kind of, being against Ukraine aid, but then October 7th happens and, they kind of disappear a little bit. But I think that the opposition to Ukraine aid was primarily mostly about pivoting to China and building up against China, knowing that we can't take on China and Russia and Iran and North Korea at the same time. But furthermore, if you go back to the Sino-Soviet split, it makes at least a little bit more sense as opposed to doing everything everywhere all at once, when at least you could think that it's more of a coherent strategy to try to drive a wedge between Russia and China, instead of spending the last 4+ years bringing them together with our aggressive policy in the Indo-Pacific. But moreover, I think in terms of Ukraine, one thing I wanted to highlight is just the incorrect predictions, maybe, or things happening in ways that we didn't necessarily expect them to, or surprisingly. And I think a good parallel for people in our camp is, I've been hearing for decades Peter Schiff talk about how the US economy is going to collapse and go into hyperinflation, right? Well, the Fed's ability to keep the entire thing afloat has exceeded our expectations, that we can keep the circus running for so long. Well, similarly, there's so many narratives with Ukraine over the past 2 years that have kind of been a little similar to that. So, firstly, we've always, maybe this is a critique of the anti-war community, and it's, if anything, I don't think we're being too alarmist or anything, but talking about the United States being involved and increasing their involvement in this conflict so much that they exceeded our expectations of being able to get involved without starting a war or becoming directly involved in the war itself. So we've been talking about the danger of escalation for 2 years, and it's actually fascinating and, like, I think kind of surprising that we've been able to be involved at this level without directly becoming a combatant, with actual, US soldiers pulling the trigger, killing Russians. Furthermore, on more of like the I don't know how you would classify these, but we've heard certain people, like particularly Scott Ritter and Colonel Douglas McGregor, although I respect them both, predicting the Ukrainian collapse for a really long
Right.
time and saying it's next week, it's going to happen in a month, but it's been 2 years. Furthermore, the United States miscalculating itself, and with its sanctions campaign that we're going to see more announced tomorrow by President Biden because of Navalny's alleged assassination by Putin and the KGB, but the ability of Russia to survive and thrive under sanction, further, driving Russia into China's hands. But furthermore, this goes with Israel as well, is basically advancing the fall of the US and Western hegemony over the entire world. Now you have like institutions like the ICJ and the UN, people in the global south, countries in the global south kind of sticking it to us, but forming these alternative financial systems that have been able to thrive without, outside of US sanction. And also I just have to touch on Schrodinger. I call it Schrodinger's Russia, you know,
Mhm.
Putin simultaneously about to roll through Europe, but also not being able to completely digest Ukraine right now. And there's probably several reasons for that, but those are just my takes.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I like a lot of that. Conrail 2020, the opposition to the Ukraine aid is more partisan politics than it is America first. And you know what? I completely agree with this. And I'm kind of curious, you guys take a minute. We could do a real quick one on this. Everybody's been saying that, like, oh, this war would have never happened under Trump. And I've like just this drives me nuts when people say that, because like if you objectively look at Trump's Russia policy, everything was in line for this pretty much to happen. I mean, he was more hawkish on Russia than Obama was. He got impeached over trying to withhold the Javelin anti-tank missiles to Ukraine, but then ultimately caved on that and sent them in anyways, and then got impeached for it anyways. So, like, just this idea that this would never happen under Trump, I think this just shows like where a lot of people's biases are and how they can't just look at the objective facts on the ground and say like, hey, this was completely I shouldn't say completely, but like largely outside of the US, and like this was going to happen regardless. And Trump's, Trump being caught up in Russiagate and the way that he was kind of contributed to this whole situation, not to mention, tearing up the INF treaties and the open skies treaties and stuff like that. So real quick, Connor, what are your thoughts on kind of like this idea, and especially like since we're going into the 2024 election, people think that Trump's going to walk in there, and you've heard Tim Pool say this, Trump's going to walk in and the war in Ukraine is going to end that day. What's your take? What do you think?
I'm less than optimistic, even with such a luminary as Tim Pool making such a bold prediction.
Oh,
I will say this: there's probably a whole article that should be written, making the case that actually the war, this kind of claim that, well, he didn't start any new wars, which is kind of crazy, right? Because you're talking about he fought the war in Yemen, which was a real deal genocide for 4 years, and set records for the number of bombs he dropped in Somalia, in Afghanistan, in Yemen. Nearly started a war with Iran, attempted to overthrow the government of Venezuela, drastically ramped up the Asia pivot, especially in 2020 under the cover of the COVID crisis when nobody was paying attention. And as you point out, helped follow up on John Bolton's mission during the George W. Bush years of knocking out every last pillar of the the most critical aspects of any sort of modern sense of arms control we have on the global scene, especially between the United States and Russia. And of course, this follows Barack Obama's launching of a multi-trillion-dollar project to revamp the whole nuclear triad, nuclear weapons triad, which is, that's another thing, just like with Trump, that gets forgotten, is that Obama started the Asia pivot, the largest military buildup since the Second World War, shifting 2/3 of all American air and naval forces to the Asia Pacific, encircling China with hundreds of bases as well, to fight them in a direct war. He also did, like I said, this project, multiple trillions of dollars. I believe it's 1.5 or 2 trillion, maybe more. It'll be much more than that at the end of the day, over 30 years to revamp the whole nuclear triad. And then, as you say, Trump was more hawkish on Russia than Obama was. And I'll just say that, he was sending the Javelin anti-tank missiles, I believe, since 2017. at least 2 years before Ukraine Gate. And so, and again, Obama wouldn't do that. But Trump's also the same guy who was, if Biden had done this, they'd be celebrating and jumping up and down. He bombed something in the neighborhood of hundreds of Wagner mercenary forces in Syria and Deir ez-Zor province, along with some Syrian Arab Army personnel for getting too close to our illegally occupied oil fields in Syria, where we stole a third of their country and are stealing all their wheat resources and most of their oil resources as part of an economic war against a country where 90% of the people live below the poverty line. And then also the war in Gaza is largely a result of the Abraham Accords and the overall Middle East war that's coming.
I heard that the Abraham Accords, that Trump established peace in the Middle East. That's what everybody keeps telling me.
Oh yeah, well, that's what happens when you sell a bunch of weapons and formalize, or you recognize the annexation of the Golan Heights and move the embassy to Jerusalem and support the mass murder of women and children and teenagers every week in the Great March of Return protests. See, it's when you have a concentration camp full of surplus humanity and they're protesting being under a full air, land, and sea blockade. What what
is it? The most pampered people on the face of the planet.
Sure. You send snipers out there to shoot children and paraplegics and journalists and medics, and then you send Nikki Haley to the UN with her little binder to say that Israel is defending itself. And so that policy, and also, ripping up the Iran deal, which was preventing this possibility of there being a war with Iran. It was meant that they had the most comprehensive nuclear inspections regime ever implemented by the UN, which we knew since at least 1970. It's been more than 50 years now of Iran being a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that they were never seeking nuclear weapons. That was always a lie. And but of course, Trump, working on behalf of Sheldon Adelson, the Zionist oligarch, casino magnate, and Benjamin Netanyahu gave them, Israel, everything that they wanted. And what that entailed in the Abraham Accords was basically building up a anti-Iran coalition, sort of a NATO-style coalition. This was continued by the Biden administration right up until the war started. They were even trying to bring Saudi Arabia in on this. And so, the idea was to throw the Palestinians under the bus, normalize apartheid. That's what they were doing. They were normalizing the complete dispossession and slow motion genocide, whatever you want to call it, of the Palestinians, and then sell a bunch of weapons to make money for the American military industrial complex. There were other favors that the Americans did that disgraced us, like recognizing the, Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara, where they have another brutal military occupation. So we disgrace ourselves, sell a bunch of weapons, and basically build up this sort of coalition against Iran that was supposed to go very well. And of course, the axis of resistance threw a huge monkey wrench into that. And October 7th was a prison break that launched this whole new phase of the war to push the Americans and probably the Israelis as well out of the region ultimately. And I don't know if that's going to succeed, but it is this Trump policy, which Biden was glad to carry over. He just wasn't as successful at it.
Right.
They were more hawkish. The Biden administration was more hawkish on Iran than the Trump administration was. If you go by the number of assassinations that Israel was carrying out that were underwritten and supported by the U.S., the number of sanctions, because the Biden administration did not lift a single sanction. They just kept expanding sanctions this entire time. The Israelis have been carrying out drone attacks inside Iran. The U.S. has been bombing Iranian allies in Syria as well. We even had Mark Milley going in to say to the House of Representatives, I forget what the committee was. He was speaking, probably the House Foreign Relations Committee, but saying that, we're going to begin harshly targeting the IRGC because we know they're the ones they're the head of the octopus. He sounded like Netanyahu or Naftali Bennett or something. And, this is the kind of, you probably wouldn't have even, Pompeo and Bolton were trying to suck Trump into a war with Iran, but he didn't fall for it. And it's very obvious. And Trita Parsi has made this point virtually the entire Biden administration, that Biden has been more hawkish on Iran and more deferential to Israel. And he kept saying, this is very alarming. Something bad's really going to happen here because Biden is way more deferential to Netanyahu and these Israeli hawks, whether it was Bennett or Yair Lapid, because what they were saying, and Jake Sullivan was too, and whether it's just rhetoric, it doesn't matter. And Tom Nides, the former ambassador to Israel, they were saying, we give you a green light. If you attack Iran, we have your back. And that is explicitly something that even Trump and Obama and George W. Bush would not do. And it was coming at the same time that Bennett was going to Biden in August of 2021 and saying, here's my plan. We're going to kill Iran by death by 1,000 cuts, economic, diplomatic, covert operations. And we need you to stay in Iraq and Syria indefinitely. And then he was boasting on his way back that I'm very pleased with the results of the meeting because the Biden administration, Tony Blinken is an ardent Zionist. Basically he's a liberal kind of flaccid version of Mike Pompeo. And so it's just, it's almost like this is the worst possible administration for this situation to happen. Because I talked to Kyle about this earlier today, and there is kind of a counterfactual of how would the Trump administration have handled this differently. And it's possible that it could have been worse, or it's possible that it could have been actually not nearly as bad. But the Biden, you have to keep in mind, Joe Biden is they call him Israel's man in Washington. That's what he's been known as behind the scenes for decades. He's received more money from the Israel lobby than any other American senator in our history. And he is he is Genocide Joe. And that is how the world sees him. That's how most of the country sees him now. And it's just the most absolutely disgusting thing. But I really am not I do believe that Trump's policies led to these particular wars, whether you're talking about Ukraine or you're talking about, what's happening right now with the Houthis and also Hezbollah and also the situation in Gaza. If Trump is such a tough guy, he could have leveraged aid to Israel and refused to move the embassy and refused to recognize their illegal annexation of the Golan Heights and as they were expanding settlements and murdering children in Gaza, he could have settlements West Bank and murdering children during the Great March of Return protest. He could have used all that to actually sue for peace in the Middle East, but he didn't. Instead, he just worked on behalf, as he always did, for the military-industrial complex and for the hard right Israeli lobby factions that he represents and that Nikki Haley represents. So no, I don't give him any credit, and I don't think he would solve the war in Ukraine. It probably wouldn't be as bad as Biden because, quite frankly, I do think there is something to be said for having a president who isn't completely brain dead. And seriously, like there might be.
Right,
and also, Trump's not. I think he has more of an ego than Biden in the sense that I don't think George W. Bush wanted to be a great president. I'm not even sure Biden ever did. I think Biden just wanted to be president. And it's almost as if any faculties he had
he's
left
on
shut
autopilot
down as soon as he became president. Yeah.
Right.
And Blinken and Sullivan are actual serial killer murderers. They really are. And that's what Jake Sullivan always has been. That's what Tony Blinken always has been. Those guys have, especially, Blinken goes back. He was one of the ringleaders working for Biden when he was the Senate whip on the Foreign Relations Committee. He's bylined the Iraq war, the war in Syria, where we took Al-Qaeda's side, the war in Yemen, where we took Al-Qaeda's side, the war in Libya, where we took Al-Qaeda's side, the war in Ukraine. This is all Tony Blinken. And so, and Jake Sullivan is just as much of a sick son of a bitch too. Being Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden's right-hand man at various times. Although Blinken is more Biden's right-hand man, but Sullivan is obviously running the show to a large extent here. And we have Victoria Nuland in the administration. It's just an absolute nightmare. It's hard to believe that this could be worse than Elliot Abrams and Mike Pompeo and and Nikki Haley and all these people. So, it's very disgraceful. I would be very shocked if Trump came into office, if he even is allowed to take office, which I think is very unlikely. But if he came back and he didn't just fill his cabinet with real deal neocons again, I bet you he would, because I bet he has no idea what really happened under his watch, and I don't think he has any qualms about what Israel is doing in Gaza or the threat the wider war poses to the United States, because I think that I don't think he can even really conceptualize what a true America First foreign policy looks like.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So Kyle, I want to throw it over to you. When it comes to Navalny, I'm going to be honest, I really haven't kept up with like the whole Navalny deal. I hardly even knew who he was until this whole deal broke out. And then also, I kind of want your thoughts on the Tucker and Putin interview because like it was really, really interesting. I'm sure all you guys watched, so you guys can add in your commentary as you feel necessary. It was really interesting to hear Putin kind of not only call Tucker pretty much a CIA asset, but also the fact that he kept saying that, like, well, America made the mistake of, arming Ukraine, and America made the mistake of doing this. It almost seems like Putin just kind of looks at this as like, oh, well, shit happens. So, we just have to let like the US dominate the world, and we're just kind of like helpless bystanders, and we're going to see what happens. What's your thoughts on some of that? And then if there was anything that Connor, you felt missed in my initial questions, if you want to add anything to that, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
So
Still
I
muted.
don't think Connor actually missed anything,
Okay.
but I do want to just
he
say,
normally doesn't.
but I do want to just say that in everything he said, let's just pretend that Trump had a German Shepherd running around the White House biting people. Just that, right? Imagine the number of protests, the number of stories about how
you
Trump
wouldn't hear
has
shit about
a
pit bulls anymore.
Nazi dog running around the White House attacking people, and how, I'm sure every single one of the people attacked that was either a woman or a minority, that would be, intentionally Trump had this dog sit on this black.
There's good
Secret
dogs
Service-
on both sides. They're great in kennels. They're great in the White House. No matter what you do, they're great. But listen, some are bad, some are good. They're not sending their best.
And then there would have been a field day when he ditched the dog.
Right.
Right.
Well, and you could imagine Joe Biden, right, being like, for God's sakes, this man cannot remain in the White House. He has a Nazi dog running around biting people.
Will you shut up, man, about the damn dog?
And so, and while, everything Connor pointed out is like, extremely smart, and in a lot of ways, personnel makes policy, Trump was also very reactionary. And I think
yes,
maybe even still, when they go out in the street, the liberals are the most powerful political bloc in the United States as far as making demands and getting their way. And so when Trump is in office and people are reacting to him, it seems unlikely, given our current scenario, that we would have walked down a road that Zelensky would have been dismissed as one of the dictators in love with Trump, but the narrative does fit, right? Or even, you asked about Alexei Navalny, right? This is somebody who is a fairly unpopular political figure in Russia. His base is like slightly upper class people in Moscow. And so the West liked him for that reason, because the people he got out in the streets are the kind of people and in the places where the US wants to show people out in the streets. And so he had that like maybe unique little advantage, but largely he only had 2% popularity in Russia. And he had used every disparaging word you could think of for gay people, and certainly was not a fan of Russia's minority Muslim population, and had called them cockroaches, and has suggested shooting them and killing them in mass with, just going out in the streets and doing that. So, in that way, this is somebody else who you could see the liberal media linking to Trump, right? Like if Trump embraces Navalny and is like, oh, we have to sanction Russia over this guy, imagine the liberal media going, oh, Trump loves another Nazi, right? Like you could see these kinds of things happening. And especially with Netanyahu in Israel, like this is the one where I do think there would probably be some meaningful difference. I think the liberals would have hemmed Trump in on Israel. Now, I think Trump would have greenlit and willfully given Israel every single bomb to probably destroy the northern half of the Gaza Strip, and gleefully danced on the graves of Palestinians with Netanyahu. However, I think that at some point the liberals would have cornered Trump into saying a red line for Israel, and Trump would have forced Israel to follow through with it. I feel similarly about the situation in Ukraine with Zelensky, where the liberals would have probably pressured Trump into making some demands of Zelensky. Maybe Gonzalo Alira is still alive because they pressure, Zelensky to release this American journalist who's held in jail. And so, it's so hard to think of the counterfactuals and what the world would be like if Joe Biden wasn't president for the past. I still can't get over it. First of all, congratulations to him. Who really thought he was gonna make it 3 years? I mean,
No, not
given how that man looked in 2019, the fact that he's held it and I know he's had some rough press conferences where he doesn't know what year it is and things like it's decades off, like actual signs of dementia. At the same time, he's an old man who tries to hustle up the stairs and stuff like that. So
and falls. He sometimes falls.
He tries. I mean, I do too, if we're being honest. So, he's doing all right. As far as going out there and putting on a face for what you expected, I think at this point. But it is hard to imagine what the world would be like if Trump were president. Now, with the Navalny, I think I covered most of my thoughts on that already, just kind of with his legacy and who he was. I have no idea. Everybody says he's for sure an agent of MI6. Aaron Mate made a pretty good point in his coverage of this, that there is a pretty big discrepancy between Navalny, who is a legitimate Russian nationalist who supported the original annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, supported the war and the independence of South Ossetia and the intervention in Georgia and stuff like that, and some of the people on his team, including his wife and a lot of his supporters and backers who have advocated for him while he was in this Russia military debacle and stuff like that. And they do seem to be linked to Western intelligence. Now, that certainly means that he has some connections. I'm just not sure how firm they are and how much he was acting on behest of Western intelligence and not just doing what he wanted to do and was going to do anyways. Then, people are speculating as to who killed him, and they say, oh, there's an election coming up, so Putin clearly wouldn't have wanted him killed. I think that maybe misunderstands Russian politics. I mean, it might not be a bad look in Russia to, show yourself like, I am not to, don't mess with me. Do not, I am not going to allow somebody to run around the country and try to undermine me. You will be dealt with. This is a time of war. And I mean, as much as we might go, ooh, who will believe like that? Remember when Ted Cruz was running for president in 2016? This is 15 years after 9/11, he's gleefully smiling on the debate stage while he's suggesting turning Syria into glass, of all countries that had nothing to ever do with attacking America, right? And so, it's hard to see it from the outside, but from the inside, having a strong man leader is something that's appealing to a lot of people. And so I'm not quite so sure that Putin had no cause to do this. Also, this is a guy who has been boosting anti-Russian causes running around, and there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Russians who have either been killed or maimed in the war in Ukraine. And so it's not impossible that one of them had maybe a brother in this prison who just decided that enough of this guy, like, I'm already doing a life sentence for murder and rape or something like that. I'm just going to go off and knife this guy that I hate, who I feel like helped to undermine the Russian narrative and got my brother or something killed in the war, right? Like, all these things are possibilities as to what happened to Navalny. I don't know. One more interesting thing, his wife seems a very suspicious character. She was already in the US, which seems, odd that she's not at least somewhere in Europe trying to do some memorial for him, meeting with Biden and stuff like that. His mom apparently came out and said that, she feels that in part his wife got him killed. I'm not so sure she was making the accusation that the wife was literally behind it, like hired an assassin,
but she thinks she had something to do with it,
or just her actions, right? Like her constant provocations and how she was choosing to act through Navalny's name led Putin to kill Navalny, if you know what I mean. I'm not sure exactly how she meant it. So that's kind of, I think, my thoughts on that. There's a pretty good article on it by Tom Knapp, and then another one by Ted Snyder at the Libertarian. It's no, at antiwar.com.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's geez. So yeah, like I said, I haven't quite kept up with the Navalny situation, but a lot of people seem to kind of pin it on him being like a Western blog, or not a Western. No, I'm sorry, that's right, a Western creation, if you will. As our friend Monica Perez might say, like a created person. So, Pat, I want to throw it over to you when it comes to a lot of the stuff that's gone on with Ukraine, and then we can also kind of tie in like Palestine. When it comes to Joe Biden, it's very, very interesting because like you hear a lot of right wingers saying that like Joe Biden is leaving Israel behind. And like you could see Charlie Kirk, for instance, saying that Joe Biden was giving money to Gaza, and he didn't mention Israel in the tweet. He mentioned Gaza, which like is a very, very small, section of like the funding. Like I don't think it's very much money at all when it comes to like the money that Joe Biden is sending over to Gaza. And granted, he's still sending something, but I mean, like all, the Hawks in his cabinet, Anthony Blinken. I mean, he's a fervent, very, very fervent Zionist. And Joe Biden himself is a very, very big Zionist as well. So I wanted to play this clip, and then Pat, I'll throw it over to you for commentary. And this is always just, this video always cracked me up. So I'm sure you guys have heard this before, but I just, it makes me laugh every single time.
Were I a Jew, I would be a Zionist. And my father pointed out to me, I did not need to be a Jew to be a Zionist, for I am. Israel is essential to the security of Jews worldwide.
I mean, just talk about like Biden epitomized the whole like cadence and the way that I did not need to be a Jew to be a Zionist. But like I did a podcast on this yesterday about being useful idiots, and it really seems that like when it comes to the Israel-Palestine issue, that a lot of people are being useful idiots because like they're saying, oh, John Fetterman, he's so base now that he's supporting Israel and that Joe Biden isn't doing enough for Israel. Like, when it comes to like the war issues in Joe Biden and Trump, even for that matter, it really seems like both sides kind of tie themselves in knots to be retards to promote the military industrial complex. So I know I threw a lot at you there, Pat, but any comments on kind of anything that we've kind of elaborated on in the last few minutes?
Well, I just think that there's, John Mearsheimer, Professor John Mearsheimer went on with the Judge Napolitano. I don't know if it was this week or last week, and a lot of discussion in that episode, that interview, centered around Mearsheimer's insistence or his conclusion that the Biden administration is trying desperately to rein Israel in. And I respectfully disagree with that because I think that there is an underlying truth to it. I think that the Biden administration has realized that they can't be seen as providing full-throated support. So they're trying to broadcast the appearance that they're trying to rein Israel in. But in reality, if you look at their actual actions carrying through with this, they are not powerless to stop Israel, but yet they keep providing aid and running cover.
They choose not to.
They choose not to. So I would actually throw this to Kyle and Connor if they agree with what I just said, in terms of there's an appearance with the ICJ ruling, and it's a provisional, like a preliminary ruling, but more action taking place, more litigation taking place, the United States being implicated in these proceedings, that the U.S. seems like it has to at least put the face on that it's trying to put the brakes on Israel and take, measures to stop them, but ones that they know aren't going to be fruitful.
Real quick before you two guys comment on it, make sure you have like a good mental note of this. Pat, you being the lawyer guy and you being way more familiar with like lawyerese and all that, what is your thoughts on the whole ICJ ruling that Israel is committing genocide? Because like I know when I read scientific studies, like the shit is very, very, I don't want to say jargonistic, but I mean it is dense. It is very, very hard to read. And I've read court rulings. In fact, you were probably one of the key people in getting me to like start reading some of this stuff so that way I'm solid when I talk about this kind of stuff. But like What are your thoughts on that ruling and kind of how it played out? And then obviously Connor and Kyle, you guys kind of weave in your commentary after Pat's done with his.
I mean, I was surprised that the court found provisional measures and actually went through with it and found in favor of South Africa. And I guess the reason I was surprised is because we don't know what kind of political pressure is on the court behind the scenes, with the United States and the West being some of the major players involved with, because the ICJ is a UN court. So you have to know that the major players in the UN is the United States and its other Western aligned countries. So I was surprised with the ruling, but when it comes to the actual evidence presented and the arguments being made, I wasn't that surprised. One thing about the international court, I think, and this is getting pretty technical, so you'll have to forgive me and the audience will, but the you have essentially a marriage of the two Western legal systems within this ICJ. You have the common law system, which is British and American, which is adversarial, where two sides face off each other, and we think that that will produce the truth. And I think this too, because I practice the common law, but we think that an adversarial process is better at producing the truth than a more collaborative one in a civil law system, which is practiced in pretty much every single continental European nation. So, excluding any British system, so like France, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, they all practice a civil law system. So, to me, it was a bit confusing trying to figure out exactly what like the burden of proof is, what who has to prove what and how much they have to prove it was confusing to me in reviewing this. And I think that as the court has gone along, the ICJ, they've been trying to develop exactly what the burden of proof is. And to me, it seemed like before this, at least, the burden of proof was a sliding burden of proof. So the judges like decided while they were hearing the evidence how much proof they would need, which as a litigating attorney just drives me absolutely batshit insane. Like how do you involve yourself and litigate a case if you don't even know what the burden of proof is? And so
Right.
it was unclear. Like the first thing the court should have mentioned in ruling its decision should have been what the burden of proof is and who had to prove it.
Sure.
So I hope this isn't too much of an aside, but it was
No,
just
you're good.
infuriating because in the past they've been like, in other disputes not including genocide that the court has heard, they were talking about okay, well, the more serious the allegations are, the more proof that we need. So the higher the burden of proof would be, the more serious the allegation is. But
And that,
not,
I think that's a reasonable expectation.
I think it is, but you should go into it securely knowing what the burden of proof is. But it
Right.
wasn't just the height of the burden of proof, how much you had to prove, but it was the volume of evidence too that mattered. And I think
Okay.
that when this was litigated, I was worried about the volume of proof that was required. And I think overwhelmingly, you have it's the intent to commit genocide as well that is
Sure.
crucial to proving the case. And they had so many statements from officials, and
Yes.
Israel tried to
Correct.
characterize those as not constituting an official policy, which was the smart defense to present. But
It
I
is,
think it
yeah.
was just so overwhelming and important that the South African jurists, the lawyers for South Africa, not only demonstrated that Israeli officials were saying this, but they also demonstrated that Israeli soldiers on the ground were instituting that policy that was being said by the officials. And that was
Mhm.
goddamn important. And I think
Okay,
that's
so
probably what won
yeah,
that
so
element.
okay, yeah, so I guess to throw this out there because I wanted to talk about this a little bit too, and then I'm sorry I keep bumping off Connor and Kyle here, but this was a video that had been going, I don't want to say viral, but I mean 3.5 million views, it's a lot of views. So I'll read along with this and you guys can give your thoughts.
תקשיב טוב, אדון גיס 50,
So
מר
now listen up,
כסיף,
Mr.
לא
Fifth Call,
אתה
Mr. Kassif,
ולא
neither you or your
השותפים שלך,
partners
שמגנים עליך
who are
מבית
defending
ומבחוץ,
home and
מזיזים
abroad
לנו כהוא זה.
matter to us even one
הממשלה
bit.
הזו
The
לא
government does not
מגמגמת
stutter
לגביך.
about you.
אתה יכול להמשיך
You can
לחלום
keep dreaming
שנסיים את
that we will
הלחימה
end the
ללא
war without
ניצחון.
victory.
אנחנו לא
We are not
מתביישים
ashamed to
לומר
say
שאנחנו
that
רוצים
we
לראות
want
את
to see
חיילי
soldiers
צה"ל
of the
הגיבורים
IDF, who are the
והקדושים
whole
שלנו
heroes of
תופסים את
ours,
סינואר
catching
והמחבלים שלו
Sinwar and terrorists
באוזניים
by their
וגוררים
ears and
אותם
dragging
בכל
them all
הרצועה
across the Gaza Strip
בדרך למרתפי
on their way
שב"ס,
to
אבל
dungeons
שב"ס
and
של
prison
בן
authority for
גביר,
Ben Gvir's
לא
prison
של
authority,
בר-לב או
Bar-Lev
מיכאלי,
and
או במקרה
McKaylee,
הכי טוב
or
לארון
best case
קבורה
scenario
כזה
to
או
a
אחר.
coffin.
אני אישית גאה
I'm personally
בהריסות
proud
של
of the
עזה
ruins of
ושכל
Gaza
תינוק,
and that
גם
every
עוד 80
baby,
שנה
even 80
מהיום,
years from
יספר
now,
לנכדיו
will tell
מה
their
עשו
grandchildren of what the
היהודים
Jews did
שרצחו להם
when their
משפחות,
families were
אנסו
murdered
אותם
and
וחטפו
raped
להם
and their
אזרחים.
civilians were
אתה
kidnapped.
והחברים
You
שלך
and your
יכולים
friends can
לחלום
dream
שנאפשר
that
לכם
we will
לבנות
allow you to
ממשלה,
build a
כי אם
government
אתם חושבים
if you
שהפרס על
think
שחיטת יהודים, אונס
that the
נשים,
prize of the
עריפת
rape of
ראשים
women,
וחטיפת
beheading and
אזרחים
kidnapping
יהיה
civilians
לקבל לשבת
will be to
בממשלת
sit in the
שינוי,
government of
אתה
charge.
חולם.
You are dreaming.
תצעקו עד
You can
מחר
keep
שלום עכשיו
shouting peace
ובחירות
now and
עכשיו,
elections now.
מקפלן ועד
From
עזה
Kaplan to
שישמעו
Gaza,
אתכם.
let them hear
לנו
you.
יש
We have a
משימה,
mission.
אני
I'm
מסיימת.
concluding.
והדבר האחרון
The last
שניתן
thing we
לכם,
will allow
שעופר
you
כסיף
to is
יעלה להר
offer
הבית
the
עם
Temple
דגל
Mount
פלסטין
of
וסינואר
flag
יהיה
Palestine
שר
for
הביטחון
Sinwar
של
to the
המדינה
Minister of Defense.
הפלסטינית כמו אחיו
Palestinian
ערפאת.
state, I
לא
couldn't
יונה
keep up. Not a dove, not an olive branch, only a
ולא עלה
sword
של זית, רק חרב,
to cut off
לערוף
Sinwar's
לסינואר
head.
את הראש, זה מה שהוא
That's
יקבל מאיתנו.
what he will receive from us. So I'm sorry if anybody didn't kind of follow that. It was a lot. But I mean, right there alone, that's a pretty devastating statement. So Connor, Kyle, I know you guys got a lot to kind of unpack there. Pat, if you can remember your question, I'm pretty sure it was something about the way that the Biden administration and a lot of liberals are kind of interpreting the genocide in Gaza going on, and the way that a lot of people were kind of being useful idiots for this whole situation. Anything to add there, Connor, and then Kyle, you can take it away after Connor.
Yeah, I believe the official position from the White House with the genocide accusation and the preliminary ruling is nuh-uh. I mean, really.
Well, that's
realistically-
the same answer I get when I call Ron DeSantis a neocon. Is basically people say nuh-uh, and then it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, what's your proof? Nuh-uh, he's not a neocon. What do you mean he's a neocon?
And
He
then you're
voted
they're not
against
calling for
Syria.
genocide, and then we just watched a Hitler speech. Like, seriously, close your eyes and play that again and tell me who the hell is actually saying all of that, and then read the subtitles. No, one of the most interesting aspects of this is the fact that the American people have seen what Israel actually is and what the United States' relationship with it is as well. The mask has been completely taken off. Shortly after the attack, Horton wrote a great article for the Institute and antiwar.com about how basically Hamas is jerking your chain, Israel, and they're forcing everybody in the region to take a stand here based on what you do next. And so in many ways, it's analogous to Osama bin Laden baiting the United States into invading Afghanistan, and then its larger war on terror to bleed itself to bankruptcy and ultimately force it to withdraw. And this is obviously helping, although they're not ideologically Hamas is no ally of Al Qaeda; those are bitter enemies. But the fact is that people have had to watch with their own eyes the absolute mass murder of tens of thousands of innocent people. At least 30,000 officially. It's about 29,000, almost 30,000 right now. And 2/3 of those casualties are women and children. I've never seen in my life, no matter how many of these wars we've fought and how many people the American government has been responsible for killing, women and children too, just not any different here. Just the scale and how the short time span, the volume of mass murder has been astounding, and the depravity. But I've never seen a spokesman for the government like John Kirby come out and say, as he did, I believe 4 weeks into the war, that, you know what? Thousands of innocent people are going to die. And that was after they were doing the game where they were denying the numbers coming out of the Gaza Health Ministry and saying, well, it's run by Hamas and you can't believe anything Hamas says, which is hilarious because Israel literally helped lie us into the war in Iraq. There is no reason for the American people to believe a damn thing the Israeli government
Well,
ever
and real
says.
quick
They
on
lie
that
all the
point,
time
On
about
that
Iran
point,
and nuclear
yeah.
weapons. They lie about absolutely everything. Their whole, even this whole October 7th thing, we have a huge investigation by William Van Wagenen out at the Institute right now, the brilliant researcher and writer. And of course, Brad Pierce has been on this, and the guys at the Gray
Yes.
Zone, Max Blumenthal,
Phenomenal.
etc., debunking so much of the propaganda. And Haaretz has been debunking so much of their propaganda about, we were joking the other day in our group chat about, Shmuley saying in his debate with Norman Finkelstein, well, they were cutting off women's breasts and throwing them around like footballs. And, you can just, if you're a Zionist and you speak on behalf of the goddamn apartheid state of Israel, you can say whatever you want and never be held accountable because of the amount of power that the Israeli lobby holds over our Congress and our executive branch and our media. And so it's so agonizing, I think, for the American people to have to see that your money is going towards bombing schools, hospitals, universities, mosques, churches, humanitarian shelters, homes. We're bombing ambulances. We're bombing orchards, fields, greenhouses, maternity wards, and not just and hitting them with tear gas canisters in the West Bank and laying siege to hospitals, not just in Gaza but also in the West Bank. And so, and you have a constant social media feed, especially in the first few months of the war, of just children and women and young men dying and being killed all day. You could go through and watch hundreds of people die. And I don't think that the American people have ever had to witness something like this so clearly. And so it is, very encouraging that people have said, well, this is genocide. I mean, Kyle's written a lot about this at the Institute, about these polls that are coming out that show that, I believe it's over 50% of Biden voters from 2020 believe that he's committing. Okay. They believe that he's committing genocide. Young people feel this way. And you have even, African-Americans and Hispanics who are, shifting their votes in large numbers based on polling anyway, looking ahead to the next election from Biden to Trump. Because they're just so absolutely disgusted with what's been going on. And I think the level of lying, the sadistic, the callous nature of our goddamn Congress. The latest one is this Republican representative from Tennessee who's coming out and going, "Oh, I say kill them all." You think that's bad? What Israel's doing? I say kill them all. How about that, lady? And we have Brian Mast, advertising his dual loyalty, where he comes out in his IDF uniform and tells the Code Pink girls that, we're starving half a million people to death because he just refused to put a government together.
What drives me nuts about this is that there was a supposed Chinese citizen that got elected in California, and people are losing their goddamn minds over this. And okay, yes, it's weird, but can we talk about dual citizenship when it comes to the Israel stuff and people who serve in our government that can choose whether or not to get that money gets sent over to Israel? And then I wanted to touch on the Hamas number stuff. What is the first thing that you hear any of these motherfuckers who are pro-Israel say? Oh, those are Hamas numbers. Okay, but Israel and the United States believes these numbers. So do you agree with them or do you agree with Hamas? Because they're all in agreement here. You're the only one that's denying it just to push your cause a little bit further. This shit drives me absolutely batshit fucking nuts because we morally support Israel and we morally support the West. Okay, you support them killing 30,000 people? Well, those are Hamas numbers. They cite those numbers. They're saying these are the amount of people that we've killed. So, okay, well, are you only pro-West insofar as it makes you look good? If you are, just say, hey, I think the West is great, and I'm going to lie to make myself look good. Okay, at least I know you're full of shit. Just admit that, and we can get on with the conversation then. But if you're just trying to fucking play both sides and be dishonest about it, okay, I don't want to talk to you. There's no conversation to be had because you're a dishonest piece of shit. I cannot stand when people do shit like that.
Well, and the other notable thing too is I think that even that aspect of the propaganda that this is Israel represents Western values in the Middle East. They don't represent
What
Western values
way? In what
anywhere.
way?
Yeah, unless you're talking about our rich history of committing genocide and colonialism and imperialism. I mean, that's not anything to celebrate. What we believe in the United States, or at least we claim to, is we believe in property rights, the right to your labor, your liberty, and the fruits of your labor. And,
Connor,
and your right to the pursuit of happiness. That is not what Israel believes in. They believe in dispossession, killing children. They believe in apartheid. They believe in
Medical mandates.
ethno-supremacism.
Connor, you said
Yeah.
colonialism, so you're a leftist now.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. You got to remember that.
Of course,
It's,
I've been hiding
Scott
it all
Horton.
these
Yeah,
years.
our friend Scott Horton is a closeted Maoist, which is literally something that somebody said. I'm like, what are you even talking about?
I don't know. I'm
Scott,
the guy who said that Tiananmen Square was exaggerated. So
Kyle, go ahead.
and
sorry.
No, I was
Yeah,
just going to
you're
say
good.
that the great thing about that is, to Pat's point, we always talk about Tank Man, but there's a very famous incident during the Second Intifada where a young boy, there's a great picture of a young boy in Gaza who's, I believe, 9 years old. And I forgive me, I'm blanking on the name, but he throws a rock at an Israeli tank. And no one ever talks about this, but that little boy then, about a week or 2 weeks later, was murdered by the IDF. And again, Rachel Corrie was run over by an Israeli bulldozer, an American citizen. And again, nobody cares when Israel kills American citizens. And they've done it since October 7th. They killed an American teenager in the West Bank. And 2 years ago, they murdered in May Shireen Abu Akleh, the world-renowned journalist from Al Jazeera, an American Christian citizen, Christian woman, a journalist. They blew her face off for covering a raid on the Jenin
not to
refugee
mention,
camp.
she had a vest on that said press
and a helmet and a press helmet.
Yes. And they shot her. Kyle, I know I saw you laughing a little bit when Connor was kind of going off, so feel free to add your commentary as necessary. I hate to kind of rant a little bit more before I throw it over to you, but like, I just can't stand this idea. Oh, you guys have a leftist bias because you're looking at Israel through the leftist lens. Okay, well, first of all, they're right. You guys can knock the communists and like I had Nick from the Revolutionary Blackout Network on a couple weeks ago. He's right about foreign policy. There's nothing that he's wrong on when it comes to foreign policy. And if people have a problem with that, go fuck yourself. Caitlin Johnstone, she is right about everything when it comes to foreign policy. You guys can knock her and say that, oh, she's a communist and she's wrong about this. She's wrong. Yes, I agree. She's a retard on economics. When it comes to foreign policy, she hits the nail on the head every single time. Well, she's just anti-capitalist. I don't care. She's right on foreign policy. Why are you guys sitting here trying to make her into Murray Rothbard? She's not. She's right on foreign policy. We can praise her for that. The same way you guys can't wait to give fucking Trump a blowjob because he fucking jacked off the corporate press. And you're right to do so. Just be objective about the way that you're assessing people and realize that's the way that it is. I'm sorry, Kyle. Go ahead. Take it away.
No, I'm going to steal it. Sorry, Kyle.
You're good. You're good. Go ahead.
I have only ever defended the Palestinians on libertarian property rights grounds. I'll just say that. I mean, that they are the rightful title owners to that land. That is what I go off of. Anyways, Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I also anchor pretty much all my opposition in the fact that we give aid to Israel, right? Like if this was happening between two African countries or two Southeast Asian countries and the US had played no significant role in it either way, it may be something that I talk about on the show, but it's certainly not going to headline every single show every day for months on end like this one has. And it has because America enables this. And when you go to the Middle East and when you listen to what not just Palestinians, but Iraqis, Syrians, Lebanese, Yemenis, Somalis, all these people say about the situation, they say the US and Israel are committing a genocide in Gaza, right? Just like they said that the US and Saudi Arabia were committing a genocide in Yemen for 7 years when they were waging that war. It's the same thing. And so you got to understand that even if you don't see it that way, the people who it's being inflicted on see it that way. And when you look at the facts, it's largely true. Donald Trump, he made the statement that he could end the war in Ukraine in one day. And I think that's largely untrue. I think that war will not only take years to really wind down and to set the new boundary lines and things like that. That's going to be very complicated, but actually get the fighting to stop will take weeks, if not months. You know why? This is a very long battle line. There are a lot of factions in Ukraine with a lot of different power, a lot of different corrupt interests. This is not going to be easy to do. On the other hand, the war in Israel could be ended almost at any time by the US. Now, I do worry somewhat at this point that the US could pull the plug on the war, but not the genocide, in that you know, the US isn't going to start attacking Israel. I don't think any countries are going to go to war with Israel, but the US withdraws military aid from Israel, and it has to really curtail or stop its military operations in Gaza, at the very least, in order to prevent a war from breaking out with Hezbollah in the north. Then that, you know, I guess Israel will have to stop the war, but that doesn't necessarily mean that aid's going to start coming in and you're going to be able to rebuild Gaza or all these other things that people are talking about. So I do think we could definitely force Netanyahu to stop the war in Israel. I'm just not so sure. It might be too late to stop the genocide at this point. You know what I mean? Like that, once you get to a certain point, once you destroy a certain amount of infrastructure, then it's just about whether aid comes in or not, right? Like if you destroy all the farms, you don't have to go around shooting everybody. They're just going to die from starvation. You know, this is how the communists have killed millions of people in the 21st century is through our 20th century is through starvation. And so this is a major way of killing people. And I really hate the association game that libertarians play sometimes. First of all, it's just stupid woke bullshit. It really is. It's the same thing that we hate the leftists for doing, right? Like we talk to somebody slightly too far to the right and they say, oh, you're a Nazi. And we get the same thing for talking to somebody who's slightly too far to the left or something like that. Now, first of all, I think that just a healthier society and healthier people are able to talk to and be friends with people who they disagree with on a large number of issues. And, I think that adds like a lot of depth to who you are as a person and how you understand and see the world. Even if I don't agree with, like, say, Matt Blumenthal or Aaron Mate on immigration issues or on economic issues, understanding how they look at the economic issues, what they see as problems, how they, then reach the solutions they want to reach. Even if I don't agree with those, seeing what they see as problems, maybe from a libertarian perspective, they're identifying problems that exist with the current system that's run by the Fed that we don't necessarily highlight and talk about enough. Like I find that this happens a lot, that I'll be listening to, Caitlin Johnstone even, and she'll make a point on economics. And yeah, the solution to what she's going to say is absolutely horrific because, this means more welfare or something like that. But, she will draw attention to a problem with government welfare or economic policy or things like that. And so, and also understanding from, just different arguments that you can make and different ways to explain things. So, again, let's say you disagree with what a leftist wants to do ultimately about, Social Security or something like that. Listen to what they have to say about the current problems with Social Security, because you could probably incorporate some of those arguments into some of our libertarian arguments, not making our arguments any less libertarian, just making what we have to say intellectually stronger because we're deeper people. And it's really unfortunate that there's so many libertarians who are so afraid of leftists and anything they have to say that they can't even, enlighten themselves and learn a little bit and, understand libertarianism even a little bit better through that. So, that's just a major problem that I think we have right now as a movement. I certainly don't want our movement to become more leftist or more woke in any way. I really like what's going on, with the Mises Caucus takeover and what that represented and everything like that. Don't get me wrong, but I think this is even the case with like Dave Smith when he sits down and talks to somebody like Jimmy Dore. Like it makes both of them like stronger and deeper people to have that relationship and to be able to have those conversations. And so that kind of stuff is important. I feel like there's a question I forgot to answer. Oh, on the ICJ stuff, I think it's somewhat important, Pat, in that if somebody is going to call me like anti-Semite for saying Israel has committed a genocide in Gaza, then I'm going to say, well, the international court issued that ruling. You know what I mean? And so that's some pretty good cover for normies. You know what? It's a very quick way to disarm a very powerful accusation against you. And so, and again, it doesn't matter as much to myself, who's a libertarian, right? Like, I don't care about world government. If the ICJ issued a ruling that I disagreed with, I wouldn't be telling the American government to follow it or anything like that. But at the same time, particularly for liberals, I think, who are maybe nervous about saying that the US is backing a genocide in Gaza, because what does that mean? Does that make me a Trump supporter or something like that? The ICJ issuing this ruling makes it kind of undeniable and gives you that argument that this is a matter of fact and not something controversial that I'm going on a limb to say. And so I think it's probably going to nudge up and start to tick up over time the number of Americans who recognize there's a genocide going on in Gaza. Now, one of the sickest things that I have seen, and it's almost cartoonish, right? Where you think to yourself, the liberals aren't going to tell their voters, yeah, Joe Biden is committing a genocide against Muslims in Gaza. And yes, we told you that Donald Trump was going to commit a genocide against Muslims, but hear us out. Donald Trump is Hitler and Joe Biden is maybe a forgetful but very, very kind old man. So is there really even a choice of who you're going to vote for here? I know you think he's committing a genocide, but come on. And that
He's not
see the pundits on cable TV actually pitching this to the liberals, saying that you have to ignore this genocide. I really don't think it's going to work. And particularly not with, particularly Arab Muslims. I don't think people necessarily understand how important Palestine is to people like Arabs, people in the Middle East, kind of the collective Muslim world. And it's kind of symbol as opposition to what the West, to what colonialism has done to the Middle East, that maybe they did this to Yemen for 7 years and largely did get away with it, right? Like, it inflicted a horrible price on the people of Yemen. They didn't win the war, but as an American, if I go out and ask somebody, what did you lose from the war in Yemen, they're gonna say, what war in Yemen? At least, if you go out and ask somebody, what are the consequences to you from the war in Iraq, they could be, oh, I knew a few guys who went over in there. They didn't come back the same. Some of them didn't come back. Maybe some people might talk about, kind of the collective moral problems that the U.S. faces, having killed 1 million people in Iraq. Other people will point to the money, but the war in Yemen, that is, no American thinks like, oh, I suffered a consequence from that conflict. I don't think that is going to be the way that we look at this war, that what Israel is doing in Gaza in the long term, that, this is a war without consequences. And, it's just, I think because of how the Muslim people feel about the Palestinians, like, this is a group of people who are not going to be treated this way. And, I'm very concerned about how this is going to develop, not just, months, but years down the line.
Well, what do you think about? Sorry, what do you think about the Biden administration trying to publicly back away from supporting Israel?
So I heard you mention the Mearsheimer thing, and I disagree that, like, again, I think I said this before, with Israel, the U.S. could force them to stop the military operations instantly. Maybe not the genocide, but the military operations, certainly. And they're not doing that. And so they're not really serious. In November, maybe, the Washington Post reported speaking with American officials who said, given how bloody this thing is getting, we gotta give ourselves a little distance between us here and Netanyahu. And, it's just going to be rhetorical, but should this thing get really, really ugly, we want to have at least said that we don't want it to get really ugly. And so to me, this seems to kind of be just a rhetorical thing. And in fact, Pat, I think at times it plays right into Israel's hands. So we've seen this actually time and time again in Gaza, where the US has told Israel, where if you want to expand military operations, you need to have a plan for the civilians. And so Israel will come up with this convoluted, completely stupid plan. And there's it's a communications blackout in Gaza. 1 million people, now almost 2 million people are displaced. So like, if the plan isn't like go to this well-known location, then people aren't going to be able to follow it. Right. And the plan had 1,000 different little bots in Gaza, and was instructing people who were in bots 37 to go to bots 134 and stupid shit like that. And people couldn't find the maps. Nobody had access to phone. It was an absolute disaster. Right. But none of that mattered because none of that got reported in the American press. All that got reported in the American press was that the Americans told the Israelis to come up with a plan. The Israelis went ahead and attacked the Israelis claimed they had a plan. They attacked the city, and then they claimed the people that stayed were only there because they were supporters of Hamas. They could have chose to follow the evacuation plan, but they didn't. Why wouldn't they? They knew we were coming after Hamas. Oh, they must have been Hamas, right? Like this is the line of logic that they're using. And so I don't think it's necessarily coordinated. I don't think Joe Biden is, on his calls with Netanyahu and they're playing this 10D chess game where Biden's like, all right, I'm going to chastise you, but this is actually going to help you commit genocide. I don't think any of that's going on. I just think the Israelis kind of understand what the U.S. game plan is here, and they've understand how to adapt and game to it. And so, I mean, it's really unfortunate that the Biden administration won't stand up here. It's really been the most frustrating thing to me that we're now in a position where the U.S. is the world empire, and the Biden administration has made the world empire as impotent as the president is. Right? The U.S. can't ask any of our allies to do anything. We never do. And so we don't get any of our demands met to our allies. We can't get American journalists out of Ukrainian jails. We can't get the Ukrainian government to hold elections or do anything reasonable in Ukraine. We can't get Israel to stop a genocide in Gaza, even though we're their largest backers and give them billions of dollars a year. We're asking them to do a whole bunch of things. Allow U.S. funded flour into Gaza. That's what we're asking Israel for. And Israel is explicitly not doing it. And the U.S. White House is still talking about giving them another $14 billion in military aid. It's just unbelievably stupid. And then with our adversaries, we refuse any kind of reasonable negotiations. It's all or nothing. You have to 100% capitulate with what we want, or we will go to war with you. And when you make unreasonable bets and people call your bluffs, then you're absolutely powerless once again. And so, I mean, it's just been infuriating to watch the Americans do this. I mean, I never really have felt like one of these rally around the flag American types. And I kind of resent it a little bit. And people who feel as though the country really reflects on who they are as a person. But I'm fucking embarrassed right now to be an American. It's not just because of the genocide in Gaza. It's because of the overall weakness and lameness. You know why? Allowing Gonzo Alira to die, an American to die in a Ukrainian prison, allowing Shireen Abu Akleh to be murdered by an Israeli sniper, and just do nothing about this, to allow the Israelis the one thing Biden could have done is he could have gotten on the phone with the Israeli government and said, you will give this American woman a dignified funeral. You will not harass the parishioners. You will allow them to assemble, you will allow them to mourn, and you will allow them to grieve. And they didn't even do that. They went out and beat the pallbearers with batons, holding this woman's casket. Right? It's unbelievable what what the U.S. has allowed Israel and Ukraine particularly to get away with. It's embarrassing. It's so embarrassing.
It's almost like we're the rich parent with spoiled kids, spoiled fucking asshole kids that we can't control, but we keep paying their bills and sheltering them from everyone who
Baby
criticizes
Netanyahu.
them.
Right.
And-
you know,
and-
they're out raping girls, and I gotta hire some lawyer like Pat to go
Yeah.
get them off for the 5th time in a row.
Yeah, god damn it. And
God damn
they,
it, keep it in your fucking pants.
they come home after they win the trial, their rape trial, and we try and sit them down and have a conversation with them. Well, we don't even do that. We say, hey, maybe we should talk about this. And they say, fuck you, Dad. I want a new Benz. And so we say, okay, and we open the fucking checkbook. That's what happened. And then their boss comes out of these shit ass kids demanding things, and we just roll over.
And then we all get together and call anybody who criticizes us anti-Semites and racists.
Yes, exactly. Well, you know what? I really want to bring.
We're
that
just
up. I know my
supporting the
buddies-
Jewish
yeah.
world leaders with the Nazi trooper military forces committing these proxy wars. I mean, if you have a problem with that, I mean, this is really absolutely nuts. I have to say, I think Caitlin Johnstone really hit it on the nail on the head. There's a really great quote from her. I just want to read since you guys brought her up.
Go ahead.
This was in reference to a report that came out of Haaretz, which is essentially the New York Times of Israel. And it was about snuff films that are being made by the IDF in Gaza. And so she put it like this. So it turns out the IDF has been running a Telegram channel featuring homemade snuff films in which Gazans are brutally murdered by Israeli forces. Captioned with celebrations of the gore and pain therein, like, quote, burning their mother. You won't believe the video we got. You can hear their bones crunch. The IDF had previously denied any association with the channel, but Haaretz now reports that it was directly run by an IDF psychological warfare unit. This is one of those many, many times where Israel is so awful that at first you're not sure what you're looking at. You think you must be misreading the report. Then you read it again and you go, oh, wow, that's so much worse than I would have guessed. However bad you think Israel is, you can always be sure that information will come out later that proves it's even worse. And just on the subject of wokeness, man, I'm very pleased to see that these people have shown themselves, because basically, I thought it was relatively well understood that a lot of these Jewish Zionist so-called anti-woke people, I'm sure a lot of libertarians and conservatives think are their allies on various issues and different domestic battles. Boy, they sure turned into woke, flash mobs and complete enemies of free speech in the United States as soon as October 7th happened. I mean, they became more woke than the worst blue-haired little shit on a college campus in the Ivy League that you can find. Look at Rabbi Shmuel. Look at Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Calling out,
Ben
anybody
Shapiro.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, Bill Maher, Barry Weiss, that idiot from, damn it, I'm forgetting her name. She has the worst voice in the world. I don't even know her name. Anyway, there's a lot of people. Yeah, let's go throw her in there too. They've all turned on anybody who dissents against this or calling them anti-Semites. They're defaming anti-war protesters. I mean, you even have major podcast hosts who are supposed to be relatively apolitical, like Joe Rogan, just pretending that, all of a sudden you have these massive demonstrations on college campuses where they're calling for a genocide of all Jews. And he's like, can you believe that the president of Harvard just pretended like that's not a hate crime, that's not a violation of the code of conduct? And I'm sorry, you can't be that fucking retarded. And I have to assume that he's not. You know what I mean? Like, the idea that anybody thinks that's what's going on when people are saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free in the midst of a live stream genocide of the Palestinians is the most absurd, cynical propaganda tactic I think I've seen. And the fact that they're attempting to pretend that these anti-war protesters are a bunch of genocidal maniacs. And in fact, you see Rabbi Shmuel, the tactic is that they'll say that Hamas is actually the genocidal entity here. They're the ones who went in and started killing women and children, and they're the ones who are out to commit genocide. That's why we're bombing, as he put it, hospitals, private homes, kindergartens, schools, because, that's where they have their weapons stored and their rocket launchers and so forth. And it is quite amazing. Yeah, they literally, there's an argument that that's why we've killed over 12,000 children. And I've never seen, I really think it's quite fascinating that you can't even imagine a serial killer killing, let's say, 100 kids and pretending that it was self-defense or that they felt threatened or that something bad happened to them in their childhood in the past. And yet they have killed over 12,000 children now, and thousands more are missing and presumed dead, buried under rubble. And yet we're constantly told that it's all self-defense. Israel has a right to exist. Israel has a right to defend itself. And the unstated premise is that the Palestinians don't.
Even Michael Malice repeats that line: Israel has the right to defend itself. And like,
well, Michael Malice said that the Nakba is a case of fuck around and find out. He's a real bright light in the anarcho-capitalist movement.
But we're supposed to believe that he's some like grandstanding libertarian. I wanted to show these two things. So like when it came to the whole Israel thing, this, I don't want to say it went viral, but I definitely got a few people pissed off. So Ron DeSantis said, today I'm directing Florida's colleges and universities to make it easier for Jewish students to transfer to a Florida higher education institution, while leaders of a quote-unquote elite universities are enable anti-Semitism. We will protect Jewish students and welcome them to Florida. And I was getting pretty stoked. I had 3,000 likes on this. I said, why are you stupid Republicans so woke when it comes to Jewish people? And I think this guy called me an anti-Semite who blocked me here, and I just said, that's a good goy. And I completely just ratioed him. And I think this was the video, Pat and Connor, when you guys were on last, I think we watched this one in particular. I think you know where this is going.
College kids today really seem to hate Jews.
Like, just that line alone, they seem to really hate Jews. Like, dude, get the fuck out of here.
He opened with a haymaker, man. He's like, this is how I'm gonna. I got the best. This is like the one-liner to open the thing. Hey, but listen,
move over,
aside,
Joe Biden.
In high school, he walked around with a copy of Human Action. I mean, it was like pretty.
Oh
badass.
yeah, he's one of our guys. That's what I keep getting told.
He's aware of Rothbard.
It really does always crack me up, right? When they act like, you just had the most absurd reaction the Israelis do to these things. It's like when people heard the Black Lives Matter stuff and they're like, white genocide. You know what I mean? Free Palestine. I saw somebody yesterday say that seeing hashtag Free Palestine was the equivalent of a digital swastika.
Oh, Jesus. People are so out of their fucking minds with this shit anymore.
So
I didn't see that.
Meanwhile, the IDF is attacking hospitals, rolling through cemeteries, and digging up dead bodies of Palestinians, erasing the fact that they ever existed, and lying and saying that there's Hamas tunnels and weapon systems underneath them. And all that is turning out to be a lie. They've attacked and lied and said that UNRWA, the UN aid agency that was set up after the Nakba, where they ethnically cleansed 750,000 people, indigenous Palestinian Muslims and Christians, off their land and killed anybody who resisted, including women and children. That was set up, and now they're cutting it off at the knees, using their stronghold over Western governments to revoke any funding over false accusations that even the most mainstream news outlets you can name are looking at and saying there's no evidence here that anybody in UNRWA was involved.
The Wall Street Journal just reported that the U.S. intelligence community assessed the UNRWA claims at low confidence. And while low confidence seems like, hey, we think it's true, that in CIA speak, that means there's no evidence for it. It's just an assertion. So that's a lie. I always
the death sentence.
The UNRWA thing.
Yeah.
The claims that UNRWA is in there. And also Israel has a right to defend itself, and kind of bringing up the kids. I remember, when I was a kid, there's this great South Park episodes, the Indiana Jones one, but they're the like mob of people, South Park mob of adults is trying to free this serial killer, Hat McCollum, who had killed 36 children. And they go, yeah, but it was in self-defense. and it's just the stupidest thing in the world at the time, right? But that's actually what's going on here. So ridiculous.
Yep. And it's just I mean, they're planning on there's well over 1 million people, it's 1.5 million people in Rafah that they pushed up against the border with Egypt. And they're saying at the beginning of Ramadan, they're going to start this mass murder spree, this next phase of the genocide. It's a city with a war population of 275,000 people. Now it's filled with 1.5 million people living out on the streets in the rain in tents, with, almost virtually no access to food or water. Or medicine or shelter, just like everybody else in the designated safe zones, where there's no running water, there's no bathrooms. These people are being made to live like animals as long as they can live before they starve to death or are completely erased off the earth with an American bomb. And we're supposed to I don't know what, put aside our differences on that one issue because the immigration situation is woo. We got to do something about that. Biden's going to actually help close the border. We just need 60 billion for Ukraine. We need another, what is it, 7 billion, 8 billion for the overall buildup in Asia, including military aid to Taiwan. And then, of course, $14 billion for Israel to continue carrying out its genocide. And they're saying it's also for a multi-front war, meaning it's 14 billion. It's more than the usual yearly payment of 3.8 billion. And I will just add this: we've given Israel more aid than any other country in the world, meaning the U.S. has provided more foreign aid to Israel than any other country, and it stands various estimates. Some estimates put it over 300 billion. The consensus I've seen is 260 billion dollars. So we're talking over $250 billion for the world's most notorious apartheid state, which helps lie us into war after war. And literally, the policy right now appears to be, even though Iran is showing a great deal of restraint and cooling tensions in using its influence, which we pretend like they have all this influence over these militia groups in Iraq and Syria,
the world's leading sponsor of terror.
Yeah, and these militias have their own nationalist reasons for attacking illegal American occupation forces in their countries. But Iran has used the influence that it has over them to tell them to stop, which is why we haven't seen attacks against American bases since the first several days of this month. So we have seen a cooling of tensions. But as things stand, the Biden administration is willing to fight a simultaneous war with Iran, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. There's even been talk, I don't think it's that likely, but in The Intercept is reported on Air Force documents that show that there's discussion of ground troop deployments, American troop deployments into Gaza and certain contingencies to I guess assist in the genocide on the ground. And so that is that's the dice we're rolling. And that war would dwarf the consequences and the destruction and the death of our post 9/11 wars, which led to the deaths of 4.5 million people and cost $8 trillion. And the interest is only ever going to go up on those payments. And so, anybody who supports this is just America last. There is absolutely no room there's no gray area between supporting Israel and, having any sort of even feigned concern about so-called American interests. Everything that they do is completely detrimental to American society, to our financial stability, to our collective morality, to our legal system. I mean, we've emulated them in this era that we all grew up in, where we torture people to get confessions that we've already decided we want to use to support wars that are preemptive. I mean, that's what Kyle's done a ton of reporting on this, and there's been great pieces coming out from 972 Mag. The level of torture that's going on with prisoners in Gaza, it's absolutely disgusting. You're talking about people being burned, having their genitals tortured. I mean, and again, the symbolism of that, and the Israelis have had a shoot to cripple policy for a very long time, targeting women and men's genitalia and women's genitalia. This is a completely sick and barbaric society, and we really should have absolutely nothing to do with them. And yet, I mean, I think on the one hand, it is helpful because the American people are finally witnessing what not only Israel's capable of, but our government is capable of. Because, quite frankly, the war in Yemen was a Vietnam War level atrocity that was completely under the radar for almost our entire society. And it is the exact opposite here in this case, where people who really don't pay attention to foreign policy at all can't get away from the war on Gaza. So hopefully that's going to have a positive effect. But of course, things are only going to get worse, and I fear that before this is over, you're going to see hundreds of thousands of people dead.
Isn't the allegation that we're leftists because we only criticize Israel and we don't criticize the other Arab nations that have treated the Palestinians poorly?
That's a typical Zionist attack, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
Jack
typically,
Lloyd calling him a libertarian.
The Jack Lloyd angle is that, well, the Jack Lloyd, Austin Peterson, or Roger Mayhem angle is that we're anti-Western and we're getting our talking points from Marxists because we're taking an anti-West worldview, which to me has just always been silly because Israel's not very like a Western nation when you look at like the standards that we would associate with the best of the Western world. Like when you look at the way that their state is organized and the way that they had certain medical mandates and the way that they treat other countries around the world. If you want to talk about the last 30 years, then yes, we're definitely closely aligned to, the communist atrocities that people used to talk about. So, I mean, if we're anti-Western, and you know what, maybe this is the bigger point that I wanted to get to, and we can kind of round out on this, is that like, when I talked to Nick from the Revolutionary Blackout Network, we identified a lot of the same problems, and I think that that like the socialists and the communists, when it comes to like the dissident leftists, they kind of look at this as a failure of Western capitalism, when we recognize this as like a failure of government being involved with like private markets and private companies. The only reason why these wars are able to be carried out is because the government has their hand in so many so many arms manufacturers, and then politicians lobby for these arms manufacturers, and then they make money off of that. So like, if you're anti-West because you see the result of what is, an overly bloated government that's going around being an empire, then I can't flaw you for that because you're right. I would be anti-West too if this was the result of Western civilization. But like, we're pro-West because we look at like, let's say before 1950, when you had tight family structures and a rapidly increasing standard of living for all people, and then like prices lowering and your money being worth more. We look at that as like the peak of Western civilization. We don't look at what is today as capitalism, quote unquote, as being like the peak of Western civilization. So like, I think we have the stronger argument than the people who are saying that we're anti-West because we think Israel sucks for committing a literal genocide against the Palestinians, or that the U.S. is complicit in genocide against the Yemenis, or that like turning the entire Middle East into a sheet of glass is morally wrong. Like, we're anti-West in that respect, but all the things that make the West great and give us the most prosperous world that the population has ever known, we're pro-West about that, but we're anti-West when it comes to this bullshit imperialism.
Right. And I mean, this was always Ron Paul's point for years and years and years. People, particularly after 9/11, it was the American love it or leave it years, which is crazy. Right. It's making its return, right? I saw Tim Pool, of all people, fucking Joe Biden is sitting in the White House, right? Like, he is so worried about government totalitarianism and oppression that he decides now's the time to say that if you don't like America, you should leave, or if you don't like being an American, you should leave.
He's really become a 2000 boomer.
And it's like, who do you think, Tim? Who do you think right now decides who's a good American? The White House does. Do you think they're going to decide you're a good American, that, your team there at Timcast is good Americans? Come on, man. Like, you got to be able to think more steps past this than that. But so
they might go, the bald guy's really helping us with our China policy, getting the right wingers to support it.
Yeah.
But Ron Paul was so good at hitting this argument out of the park because he dealt with it for years and years and years after 9/11. And of course, he would say that, what has destroyed America, what has destroyed the West, is this policy of chasing empire around the world, spending our blood and treasure, creating instability everywhere, particularly in our own hemisphere, that has driven a lot of migration to America that conservatives detest so much and believe is so much at the core of our problems. A lot of the violence in our society and on our streets does stem from, you know, our glorification of the media and the not the media, the military and everything, you know, that's kind of happened with that, and injecting that into our own society, largely through our police force, but also, you know, by just exposing so many of our own young men and women to violence overseas. You know, this all has repercussions. This all comes home, and everybody always knew it would. The stripping away of our freedoms, and you know, the government's control over culture. Yeah, in the 9/11 years, it was the country music culture, right? It was the culture that the Republicans loved, that was, you know, built up and propped up by the state. But now it's not. Now it's this, you know, crazy woke shit that we have to deal with, but we should be opposed to all of it. And that's what Ron will always try to tell Republicans, and they were never able to understand it.
Connor, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just point out that again, is, you know, to your point, to your both of your guys' point about what, you know, the so-called Western values. Well, in the Middle East, we always back the absolute worst, most radical anti you know, human rights faction, anti-Western values factions you can find, whether it's in Afghanistan, where we back the Northern Alliance, child molester, heroin kingpin, communist warlords, or back in Iraq, where we, you know, overthrew Saddam, a secular dictator, and installed a Shiite theocracy, or where we backed Al-Qaeda, the Al-Nusra Front, and the Islamic State in our proxy war against Bashar al-Assad in Damascus, another secular dictator. The same thing we did in Libya, where we backed the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and Ansar al-Sharia, the Al-Qaeda-tied groups there. Ditto in Yemen, where we back Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and people roasting, you know, prisoners of war to death over spits. This is complete bullshit. And Israel is, I mean, look, this is what it really. Shortly after the war in Gaza started, there was an incident in the West Bank that I think about a lot, where the Israeli settlers went to shoot Palestinian olive farmers, and they killed 3 of them. So the next day, the Palestinians hold a funeral for these men. And the settlers come down there and murder a father and a son at the funeral procession. So again, I really don't think these American conservatives give a damn about Western values, property rights, you know, any sort of morality, whether it's based in religion or philosophy, or the Declaration of Independence or anything like that. I don't think they buy into it. And the ones who are actual spokesmen for this shit, I think they're disingenuous at best. You know, Keith Knight and I went to a CPAC event out here in Phoenix, the one that Charlie Kirk holds, and we spoke with a rabbi who was very supportive of the current genocide. And you know, there's just, it's very upsetting, you know, because you can tell when we go to Freedom Fest, there's people, they have life in their eyes. They believe in property rights. They want a higher standard of living. They want their kids to live in a prosperous nation. They want, as you said, tighter family structure and for more respect for all of our individual rights and goals. Right. And so that we, you know, try to achieve, as Ron would say, achieve our goals through reason and persuasion rather than through force and coercion. And out there, as Kyle's talking about, basically you have Hotel California, and then I'm proud to be an American, and then there's a big it's all Israeli flags, you know. Even the group of girls who are against the feminist woke culture, for whatever reason, they want to take you on a trip to Israel. They take your daughters on a trip to Israel because apparently supporting Israel is part and parcel with supporting women's rights and, you know, conservative values. And
you could get into how Israel spreads certain ideologies that aren't quite aligned with Western values, and those specific values definitely. A lot of those conservatives would like to push.
Yeah, and so there's a huge disconnect. I think that's being thankfully rectified. And so you're going to see a greater distance between the Republican rank and file constituencies and the conservative and the people who've been consuming mainstream conservative media, especially as there's more exposed to independent media and see what's really going on. I think you're going to see a lot of them become libertarians or go further right, where people are more honest with them about whether it's in this case, the power of the Israel lobby or just Jewish influence on culture, the media, politics, and they're going to be very upset because they've been lied to this whole time. I mean, people still, I mean, everybody, to bring up Tim Pool again, I don't mean to pick on him, but the thing with the
Oh, I
reaction to these
do.
kids, yeah, the reaction to I do too. The reaction to these kids seeing the Bin Laden letter to America and finally understanding that, you know what, you unconditional support for Israel's wars and occupations and against the Palestinians and the Lebanese and the Syrians and our American bases peppered throughout the Arabian Peninsula where we were blockading Iraq and bombing it 3 to 4 times every week, killing hundreds of thousands of children, and these policies of propping up Middle Eastern dictators who, subject their people to totalitarian brutality for decades on end. This actually really upset certain people in the Middle East who then decided to attack the American homeland and maybe got your father, or your uncle, or your mother, or your sister, or your brother, or your cousin killed. And your whole or your brother or your father, your uncle went off to Iraq based on a load of shit pushed by the Israeli fifth column in the United States and came back missing their balls or their legs, or they blew their own head off when they got home, or they came back with a crippling drug addiction. And you see what this does again to families. I mean, the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. So there has to be studies done that'll show, especially going forward, just the long lasting and reverberating effects on just individual families, and crises of despair and deaths of despair. I mean, you're talking about 30,000 or more men who came home and killed themselves, far more than died in these actual wars themselves. And so on the American side, of course, and all of this is so people see this stuff and they go, I was lied to. I was lied to the whole time, that we were not attacked for freedom. We were not attacked for, girls in short skirts and, the whatever, our Hollywood culture and all this nonsense. No, there were very real reasons why we were attacked. And then we were lied to. And then we went and killed about 4 million people. And that should really piss everybody off. And you know what Tim Pool did and people like him? They responded the exact same way Fox News told us and our parents to react after 9/11, which is to put your fingers in the air, stick your head in the sand, and pretend that it's all because they're just crazy goddamn Muslims and they want Sharia law and they want to overthrow our government so they can enslave us and make us live under their Islamo-fascist caliphate, dictatorship. And it's just not true. It's just not true. And in fact, it only hurts us because we're the ones who are now $30+ trillion in debt. We're the ones who have suffered, who have never recovered from this economic crash in 2008, or this, all the money that was spent during COVID. And so much of that has been funneled into the military industrial complex, of course, because we're now spending something on the level of 1.6 or $1.7 trillion a year on the national security state and the Pentagon. And we're picking all these fights with Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and all these other countries in the Middle East, of course. And the American people are finally going to get fed up. So I'm actually glad in some way that Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro and all these people are being so dishonest, because it's going to stoke a lot of anger. And I think people are seeing that even with Tucker Carlson going to Russia and saying, whether or not you think there's a lot of merit to him saying, I mean, frankly, I like the fact that he's showing that, look, their society doesn't have people pissing and shitting and ODing in the streets, and it's not the subway. You don't have to worry about getting pushed onto the train tracks and killed. And their grocery store, you can get what would cost you, the normal American household, $400. You can get the same stuff, probably in higher quality, even for $100. And this is a country that's supposed to be under crippling sanctions and is fighting a war just off its borders. So, I think that makes people, on the one hand, less likely to support this proxy war against Russia and all this propaganda against other nations that we have in our sites. But it also, increases the anger and resentment against our ruling class, who have completely destroyed this country, whether intentionally or unintentionally. They clearly don't care about the American people, and that's the most important thing. And the other, I think, lesson from this whole situation with Israel and Gaza is that the American people's opinion, which is borne out in these polls and has been for months, is not being reflected at all in policy or in sentiment by our elected officials. They don't care. And they care much more about the Israel lobby and the military industrial complex than the American people and what they want. And instead, we're having our entire, names and legacy. I mean, this is the history of the United States being written here. I love when Biden and Chuck Schumer, when they want to pass a $100 billion foreign military aid bill, they go, history is watching us right now. No, history's watching Genocide Joe completely ruin the legacy of the United States if there was anything left.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, I was going to
Pat,
say the reason why, I mean, that's Connor, you just obliterated it, I think, from the mainstream argument, but people within our own circles, I think the answer is that we're not libertarian universalists. I mean, the libertarianism in one country, that's an essay that Justin Raimondo wrote. I mean, we are not here to promote liberty and individual rights and property rights in other countries. That's just not what we do. So, because the only way to enforce that is either is manipulating politics in other countries, and that's not what libertarianism is about. It's about securing property rights and freedom for our own people within our own zone of control, and that's what it's about. And there's still a large, and there always will be probably a substantial contingent of libertarians supported by the National Endowment for Democracy and Students for Freedom, or what is Students for Liberty, who advocate libertarian universalism. That's why I don't talk about Millet or support Millet actively or do much of anything, because I mean, sure, it's something we might cheer on the sidelines, maybe in the most charitable situation, but at the end of the day, whether Argentinians are more free or not, I really seriously couldn't give two fucks. I don't, because I have no way to support it. Maybe secretly in my heart I cheer for it, but as a practical matter, what business is it of ours as libertarians to promote freedom and liberty in Argentina?
right. So real quick, we could probably do plugs on this as well. My friend Siege had said, help, I don't watch the news, Israel or Gaza. I threw a little comment and said, Israel are the bad guys. Rewatch my episodes with these guys the day of the camp. You'll get informed. But you know what? Like I said, I think that's probably a good comment to wrap on it. Kyle, I know you got to go. So I guess first, Connor, go ahead and give your plugs where everybody can find you. So that way my friend Siege can find his way into our libertarian world, since he seems to be coming from a little bit of a outside perspective.
Yeah. Cool, yeah. Absolutely. So, I'm the assistant editor at the Libertarian Institute, co-host of Conflicts of Interest with Kyle and with Will Porter. You can find all my stuff in the news section and the featured articles section at the Libertarian Institute. We have the archive for all of our great episodes. We're at 548 now for Conflicts of Interest. Most of those, of course, are Kyle. I co-host the show once a week, and we do about 3 to 4 episodes every week, covering foreign policy news around the empire, and basically will keep you updated on all this stuff, just consistently, and you'll have a much better grounding if you want to learn more about what the hell we're doing in Ukraine and Gaza and provoking Iran, and even the policy against North Korea, which Biden has been, I mean, that's been like, that could actually lead to nuclear war, and it's one of the least paid attention to. People just pretend like, well, it's just on the back burner, but we're constantly like, sending nuclear strategic assets, nuclear capable bombers and nuclear armed submarines, menacing a country that we've had under sanctions for decades and decades. And so, I'm also writing news, and I'll be in the news section this weekend at antiwar.com. I'm on Twitter at Freeman's Mind 96, and I also run the the conflicts of interest account at @con_interest on Twitter as well. And our show is on, Kyle can provide all the links, but it's YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble, and anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, of course. So, Kyle Anselone, go ahead, give your plugs. I know you've been on Judge Napolitano's a lot. You've been killing it lately. So go ahead, let everybody know where they can find you, and if you got any cool appearances coming soon.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for mentioning that. It is really cool to be on with the judge. And I've been on his show almost every week for the past couple of months. So if you should watch his show anyway. He has far more competent guests on than me that you should be listening to. But if you do see me on the judge's show, like, drop a positive comment down below when you're there and things like that. Make sure I keep getting back on. I am the news editor at the Libertarian Institute and the opinion editor at antiwar.com. And then I co-host Conflicts of Interest with Connor. And then antiwar.com, I do the news on the weekends and fill in for Dave DeCamp when he's out. So I'll be writing for him this Sunday. Dave's going to be in the Mississippi, I think, LP convention. So if anybody's out that way, definitely go. I mean, Dave's a cool guy. I haven't met him in person, but I get to talk to him a lot. And so I'm sure like you'll just have a good time chatting with Dave, like at the convention. But I know he's working on a real good speech. So if you're in that area, check that out. I was on Scott Horton's show today, the KPFK show. So if you didn't catch it live, he will post it on the Libertarian Institute sometime this weekend. And I was on with Alan Mosley, our real good friend, his show, It's Too Late. I had a great time talking with him about Assange this week.
Cool. Pat, you just had all of our mutual friend Misty Winston on. Let us know where we can find that show, and obviously all your other work, and where they can support you.
Yeah, so I'm a practicing Wisconsin attorney. I practice criminal defense and family law primarily. I'm the Justin Raimondo Fellow at the Libertarian Institute, where I write some columns. I have a show called Vital Dissent that I host. It's at vitaldissent.com. And as Kyle said, I just talked to Misty Winston there. And I'm working on part 2 of Oppenheimer, my documentary. I really need to get it out, and I'm sorry it took so long, but the first year of having a new child is just hell, and that's kind of been where we've been at. And I'm hoping to announce 2 actual like in life speaking events within like this spring. So keep tabs.
Nice, guys. All right. Well, I appreciate all you guys' time. This is an awesome show, and we'll definitely have to do it again. Hopefully it's not another 2 years, and hopefully we still have like a planet and everything in 2 years. So yeah, if you guys don't got anything else, we'll close her out, and we'll definitely do it again soon. Thank you guys so much.